How can a country sit on some of the world's most valuable gold deposits, yet its people are among the poorest on earth? For decades, this wasn't just a question, it was the bleeding paradox of the heart of Burkina Faso, a nation rich in resources, but starved of its own wealth, a proud people held hostage by foreign interests and spiraling violence. But what happened when someone just decided to tear up the old rule book? In late 2002, a 34-year-old army captain, a total unknown to the world, did exactly that. He didn't just seize power, he seized control of the nation's destiny. Now he is kicking out foreign armies, taking back his country's resources, and building a new alliance that has the old colonial powers and their Western allies very, very nervous. This is the story of Ibrahim Traore, the leader who is daring to build a new future for Africa, and why the West is watching in fear. To really get the rise of Captain Ibrahim Traore, you have to understand the mess he came from. The Burkina Faso of early 2000 was a nation in what you could call a managed collapse. A brutal jihadist insurgency, spilling over from Mali, was eating the country alive. Terrorist groups tied to Al-Qaeda and ISIS weren't just a distant threat, they were a suffocating reality. By some estimates, those groups controlled as much as 40% of the nation's territory. They operated in the open, turning huge parts of the countryside into no-go zones, forcing millions from their homes and creating a devastating humanitarian crisis. Imagine living in a country where over 2 million of your fellow citizens are displaced, where entire villages are wiped off the map, and where food insecurity becomes a weapon of war, pushing millions to the brink of starvation. That was the grim reality. The government in the capital, Ouagadougou, seemed powerless, its authority shrinking by the day. The military was under-equipped, demoralized, and fighting a losing battle. Convoys were ambushed, soldiers were killed, and morale was at rock bottom. Back in January 2022, a coup led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba had overthrown the elected president, promising to stop the violence. The people, desperate for security, cautiously hoped for change, but the change never came. In fact, things got worse. The attack became more frequent, more brazen, and the feeling of being abandoned just got deeper. Soldiers on the front lines were complaining they weren't being paid, that they lacked the basic gear to fight an enemy that was gaining ground every day. The state was failing. And this wasn't just a crisis of security, it was a crisis of sovereignty. For years, the country's security was deeply tied to its former colonial ruler, France. French troops were on the ground as part of a big anti-insurgency mission in the Sahel, and yet the insurgency only got stronger. A quiet resentment was simmering. Many people in Burkina Faso, especially the youth, started to see the foreign troops not as survivors, but as symbols of a dependent relationship that wasn't keeping them safe. They looked at their country, a major African gold producer, and saw foreign companies hauling out immense wealth while their own army couldn't afford bullets and their people couldn't afford food. The disconnect was infuriating. It felt like a modern chapter in the long, tragic story of Africa's wealth enriching everyone but Africans. The government was seen as part of this broken system, unable or unwilling to change a thing. The nation was a powder keg of frustration and poverty, just waiting for a spark. It was a country desperate for a leader who wouldn't just manage the decline but reverse it. On September 30, 2022, that spark finally ignited the trigger. A brutal attack on a supply convoy that left 11 soldiers dead and dozens of civilians missing. For a group of junior officers watching their country fall apart, that was it, the final straw, and was proof that leadership was failing and failing catastrophically. And from their ranks, a leader emerged, Captain Ibrahim Traore. At just 34 years old, Traore was battle-hardened, an officer from the elite Cobra Special Forces, but a complete unknown on the political stage. Born in 1988, he joined the army back in 2009, and had seen the worst of it, serving in the bloody conflict in Mali with the UN force and fighting insurgents in his own country's north. He wasn't a politician from the capital, he was a product of the front lines. He had seen the failed strategies and shared the anger of his troops. Traoré and his men moved fast. They took the capital, surrounded the presidential palace, and dissolved the government. It was the country's second coup in just 8 months, but this one felt different. When Traoré appeared on TV, he didn't talk like a typical military strongman. He spoke with a quiet fire, talking to the nation like a son who couldn't stand by and watch his home burn down. He tapped right into the deep well of national frustration. He talked about the failed strategies and the desperate need for a totally new approach. He promised to do what the last government couldn't: secure the nation and get its dignity back. On October 21, 2022, he was officially sworn in as interim president, becoming one of the youngest head of states in the world. He promised election by 2024, but with one huge condition: security had to come first. To outsiders, it sounded like the same old military takeover script, but on the streets of Ouagadougou, it was seen as something else entirely: a necessary break from the past, a rebellion not just against the government, but against the entire system that let Burkina Faso get so weak and so poor. The world was about to find out just how radical this rebellion will be. Once in power, Ibrahim Traoré didn't just swamp out ministers, he started taking apart the entire post-colonial structure that he believed was choking his nation. His actions weren't random. They were 4 calculated moves from a playbook aimed at one thing: total sovereignty. Move number 1: kick out the old guard. Traoré's first and most dramatic move was to confront France. For years, French forces were the main foreign partner in the fight against jihadis. But in the eyes of Traoré and his people, the partnership was a failure. The violence had only gotten worse on their watch. So within months of taking power, Traoré's government demanded that all French troops get out. This was a huge deal. It was a direct rejection of the old way of doing things. Traoré declared that from now on, Burkina Faso would lead its own fight. This move sent shockwave through Paris and other Western capitals. It was seen as a slap in the face, a dangerous gamble that could create a vacuum for terrorists. But Traoré wasn't just ending a military deal, he was severing a symbolic chain of dependency. He followed up by expelling the French ambassador and suspending French-funded news channels like France 24 and RFI, calling them propaganda tools. Then, along with his allies in Mali and Niger, he pulled out of the regional bloc, ECOWAS, accusing it of being a puppet for foreign powers. This wasn't just policy, it was political exorcism. Move number 2: seize the nation's wealth. With the political house cleaning underway, Traoré turned to the economy. His mantra was simple: the wealth under the Burkinabe soil must belong to the Burkinabe people. Burkina Faso is a top African gold producer, but it's still dirt poor. Traoré slammed the old mining contracts signed with foreign corporations, calling them exploitative. His government launched a radical overhaul. In 2024, a new mining code was passed. It boosted the state's minimum free share in mining projects from 30% to 15% and gave the government the option to buy even more. This wasn't just talk. The government moved to take control of the key gold mines previously run by foreign companies. And to top it all off, Traoré's government started building a national gold refinery. The goal? To stop exporting raw gold to other nations to process and profit from. By refining it at home, Burkina Faso could capture way more of the profits and build a treasury based on its own resources. Move number 3: forge a new arsenal. After showing the French the door, Traoré had a huge problem. How do you fight an insurgency within your traditional Western military partners? His answer was to diversify and rely on himself. He immediately went shopping for new military hardware, turning to countries that would sell it without asking a lot of political questions. The government went on a massive spending spree. The new shopping list included sophisticated drones, armored vehicles, and modern rifles, and the suppliers were new. Instead of France, Traoré turned to Russia, Turkey, and China. Turkish Bayraktar drones were added to the Air Force. Russian advisors from the African Corps that used to be the Wagner Group were brought in for training. He even repurposed vehicles and motorcycles seized from terrorists for his own army. This wasn't just about getting new guns. It was a strategic pivot to build an army that wasn't dependent on any single foreign power. Move number 4. Build a new bloc. Traoré knew that his landlocked, impoverished nation couldn't stand alone, so his final move was to build a new family. He looked at his neighbors Mali and Niger, both run by military governments that had also turned away from France. Together, they formed the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. It started in September 2023 as a mutual defense pact. An attack on one is an attack on all, but it quickly grew into something much bigger, a political and economic confederation, meant to be a powerful counterweight to the old regional order. They coordinated their exit from the ECOWAS, launched a joint military force to fight terrorism, and started integrating their new economies. In January 2025, they even began issuing common AES passport, a real symbol of their union. This alliance is Traoré's grand strategy in action, an attempt to create a sovereign, self-sufficient bloc in the heart of the Sahel, completely independent of Western oversight. But you can't make a revolution without making enemies. Traoré's radical moves have been met with fierce resistance both inside and outside the country. His path has been a tightrope walk over a chasm of instability. Since taking over, Traoré has survived multiple coup attempts. The most famous one was apparently thwarted in September 2023, with more plots allegedly foiled in 2025 and 2026. The government had pointed fingers at foreign interferences, even accusing neighboring Côte d'Ivoire of backing one plot. These constant threats show just how high stakes his rule is. Internationally, the criticism has been non-stop. Western governments and human rights groups condemned the coup. His decision to postpone the 2024 elections and extend his transitional rule for another 5 years until 2029 has brought accusations of authoritarianism. This new charter even allows him to run in those 2029 elections. Then, in January 2026, his government dissolved all political parties, arguing they just caused division. Critics point to a major crackdown in dissent. Journalists, activists, and anyone openly critical of the government have faced intimidation in a move that drew widespread outrage. The government has even used a decree to forcibly conscript some of its loudest critics into the army to fight insurgencies on the front lines, a tactic human rights groups call a way to silence all opposition. And here's the toughest part. While Traoré's whole justification was to improve security, the reality on the ground is still horrifically violent. The UN has raised alarm over a surge in civilian killings, with thousands dying in attacks by not only Islamist groups, but also allegedly by government security forces during counter-insurgency operations. For all the new military hardware, the tragic truth for many in Burkina Faso is that their lives have become more, not less, dangerous. The West uses these statistics to frame Traoré not as a liberator, but as just another strongman who has swapped a weak democracy for an iron fist. To really get Ibrahim Traoré, you have to see him through the lens of African history. In his uniform, his youth, and his fiery anti-imperialist switches, many people across the continent see the ghost of another young captain who once ruled the same land, Thomas Sankara. Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987, is a legend. He is the one who renamed the country from the colonial Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of incorruptible people. He preached self-reliance, shunned foreign aid, and challenged the global order with a boldness that untimely got him killed. Traore actively channeled Sankara's legacy. His speeches hit the same notes of dignity, sovereignty, and Pan-African unity. When he talks about refining gold at home and rejecting foreign demands, he's speaking directly from the Sankara playbook. This is why his appeal is so powerful. He's tapping into decades-old dream for a leader who will finish what Sankara started. His vision and that of his allies in the AES is for Africa that stands on its own 2 feet, an Africa that controls its own resources, secures its own borders, and chooses its own partners based on its own interests. This is the vision that is feared in the West. It's not just about losing a security partner or a source of cheap gold. It's about losing control of the narrative. For decades, the Western model of democracy and development was sold as the only path forward for Africa. Traore's project is a direct challenge to that monopoly. He is proposing an alternative: sovereignty first, security first, self-reliance first. The question he is posing is a dangerous one for the old order. What if an African nation can find more stability and prosperity through strong nationalist leadership than through a dependent Western-style democracy? He's betting his country's future that it can, and that bet is what makes him, in the eyes of the West, the most feared president in Africa today. The story of Ibrahim Traore is nowhere near finished. It's a live high-stakes experiment happening in one of the most volatile regions on the planet. On one side, you have a young charismatic leader with a popular vision of sovereignty, reclaiming his nation's wealth. On the other, you have a military government that has suspended democracy and is presiding over a deepening human rights crisis. Is he a revolutionary hero, a modern-day Thomas Sankara, forging a new path for Africa? Or is he a military autocrat, using popular rhetoric to cement his own power while his people continue to suffer? The truth is probably far more complicated, but what's undeniable is that Ibrahim Traore has changed the game. He has forced a conversation that many in power didn't want to have, and he has lit a fire of sovereign ambition that's spreading far beyond his country's borders. But what do you think? Is Captain Traore a liberating hero or a military strongman? Is his model the future for Africa or a dangerous turn away from democracy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found his analysis insightful, be sure to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more deep dives into the figures and forces shaping our world.